All right, welcome and hello, everybody, to New Year, New You. Set your nonprofit up for 2023 grant success in under 60 minutes. If you haven't already, type into the Zoom chat your name, organization, what you do for them, as well as your mission, latest initiative, or your biggest challenge related to finding grants or just in general grant strategy. It'd be great to hear from you. And while you guys are doing that, I'll do a quick introduction to myself. My name is Will. I host weekly grant workshops with expert educators and best-selling authors. My company, Instrumentl, helps 2,200 nonprofits and grant writing consultants in finding, tracking, and managing their grants all in one place. And so every day, what we do is we hear about what sort of blockers nonprofits are experiencing from achieving their grant-seeking goals. In the Zoom chat, let me know if any of these resonate with you. Just be like, yes, I agree, or 1, 2, 3 for each of the reasons. But potentially, you're here today because your nonprofit struggles when it comes to consistently finding good fit funders for your mission. Or it's also possible that you're spending hours every single week double checking funder deadlines and guidelines to make sure that you haven't missed a change. It's also possible that you're just ill-equipped when it comes to evaluating what grant tools will work best for your organization. Regardless of the reason of why you might be here today, you don't have to worry because we're going to cover all of these bases and more in the next hour. Ultimately, our goal is to get you to this place, which is, as one person puts it, at this point, they can invest 30 minutes a week reviewing their matches, and they're fairly confident they don't miss any important RFPs. Thanks to Instrumentl, they're able to discover and win a 50K grant that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to find. So we'll dig into that for a little bit later on, but for the most part, this is about the strategy side of things and making sure that you're lined up for the year. So something to remember is that grants are worth it. There are over 87,000 grant-making foundations and 12,000 active grants alone on Instrumentl. Every single week, we add 100. And so there's always more funding opportunities out there, regardless of what your funding area might be. That leads us to our agenda for today, which is what we're first going to explore is we're going to explore what are the 3 must-haves when it comes to maximizing your grant success. We're then going to do a quick speed run in terms of how to set yourself up with some personalized list of good fit funders. Something I want to give you as a heads up is that I have an entire hour-long class where I dig deeper into this topic. I will give it to you for free at the end of this workshop, but just note that we will have to do that part quickly since we have such a broad strategic question we have to answer in this broader workshop here. So something to just note is that that section will be a abridged version of that hour-long workshop. But again, if you want to check it out on your own time, you're more than welcome to check that out when I share it in the chat later today. What we'll also do is talk about how you can stay on top of important grant deadlines for single and multi-step applications. I'll share a free grant tracker template you can use this year in order to continue to start building up your grant systems. And then we'll talk about how you can better understand the evaluation process of what grant tools work best for your organization. Be sure to stick until the end because I will have some special limited time offers at the end of this workshop. But jumping right in, let's talk about first the 3 must-haves when it comes to grant success. When it comes to being successful in grants, it really comes down to this PPT framework, which can be broken down to people, process, and technology. This is a framework that's actually been around since the 1960s, and it was popularized in the 1990s when there was that initial tech rise right before the bubble. And the reason why I like to bring in this framework in the context of grant seeking is because if you think about these 3 pillars, whenever you're thinking about how you're approaching grants, it can kind of give you a general framework of a way to think about what you're doing well and where you could be doing better. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about it from the context of people, people are doing the work that is required to actually get the grant proposal out the door. But then when you think about what the people are doing, they're ideally following some sort of process, because if you're not following some sort of process, then you're not being as efficient as you can be. And if you're not being as efficient as you can be, then it's going to be a situation in which you can't sustainably scale grants because your process is not in place, which naturally leads to the third component of this sort of framework, which is technology. Technology helps us automate this process. And so the reason why I like to bring in the PPT framework in the context of grants and teeing yourself up for 2023 is because it emphasizes the importance of balance. You really need to have a 3-legged stool here in order for you to actually be balanced, Otherwise, you have some consistency issues. And we'll dig into exactly what happens if we don't have one of these areas. When it comes to this, it's really thinking about these sorts of questions where, everything has to adapt to your current and future problems of your organization. A few of you guys mentioned in the chat, you've won a couple grants, you're looking to scale that. You're thinking about that process component right now. And then you're probably thinking about, as a result of that, what do we need in terms of people, or what do we need in terms of tools to help support that? And then everything can impact another aspect, right? Because if I'm thinking about how to scale up my process, but I don't have the technology, well, then it's going to be something in which it's really hard for me to scale because it's going to be a lot of manual work, which is going to take more time. All of us don't really have enough time. So it's always thinking about the fastest way to get something done. So, what you should think about when you think about people, process, and technology is, how does this look in context to a nonprofit? Well, let's first explore what happens if we don't have people. If we don't have people, then the questions we're not able to really answer is, how exactly we're going to write the grants? How are we going to meet the reporting requirements if we were to be awarded this grant? How do we even hold ourselves accountable? We can say we want to apply for more grants, but if there's no people involved and no relationships being managed, then it's something in which we can just say that, but not actually want to do any of that work. How do we ensure that our proposals are actually reflecting our organization's values? The reason why that's important is because at the end of the day, when we are pursuing grant opportunities, we want to make sure that we're building relationships with organizations and foundations that align with our interests as well. But what about if we don't have process? Well, what happens in that case? Well, in that case, we really struggle with things like how to stay on top of grant deadlines. If you ever missed a grant deadline, let me know in the chat. There's no harm in saying you have done it, because I can tell you that pretty much anyone that's been working in the grants world has missed a deadline at some point in time in their career. But it's really thinking about, what process do we have in place to make sure that we miss as few as possible and that we're on top of all the upcoming proposals that might be a good fit for us. It's also thinking about things like, how do we know whether or not this is a grant we want to pursue versus a grant we should potentially table for another day, or just ignore altogether because the funding opportunity actually isn't a good fit for us? And then the biggest question with respect to process is, how can you scale your grant strategy? I noticed a couple of you, as we were typing in the chat, you're talking about looking to expand your donor base and your board advisor list. These are the sorts of similar questions to the question of scale, which is, you might have a little bit of early success, but you don't have a clear inkling as to what the exact steps your organization has to take are in order to move into that next level of expansion in terms of revenue coming from grants. Lastly, if we don't have technology, we start to face, an imbalance because of some other issues. A lot of them people-based, in which you can have a case where staff members burn out because you're writing too many grant proposals, not winning enough, or you're writing too many grant proposals and there isn't enough space for people to really decompress after those proposals. The average nonprofit staff member's, lifetime with an organization is often 12 to 18 months. And so how do we avoid that staff burnout with the proper use of technology? How do we collaborate across the organization? If, Ben has a team member that, it needs to do a certain side of the accounting reporting for a particular grant proposal, but that person doesn't even know that that is a requirement, then how do we hold them accountable to getting that in for the proposal to get in on time? How do we bolster collaboration? If there are 3 or 5 different people working on grant proposals, when are different people brought into the process and at different points in time? And then, another question that technology helps answer too is, how can we achieve more with the same team size? Oftentimes, technology is significantly cheaper than adding another person to your payroll in your organization, and the budget might not be there for another person. And so, how can we use technology to help us, save some of that time, increase efficiency overall, and feel a little less stressed about the work that we're doing? So, what I want you guys to do in the chat is reflect on this question. Does your organization have all 3 must-haves of people, process, and technology? Are you stronger in one area or another? Go ahead and type into the Zoom chat which one you think you're strongest in, which one you think you could potentially do better in, and then we'll go from there. All right, so Jackie's saying process. I'm assuming that is the one they are strongest in. Leona is mentioning they're weak in all three areas. Greg, stronger in people, lacking process. And that's totally fine, right? And so what's really important, as you can see, folks are typing in the chat, everyone's coming in at a different place, and that's completely fine. But the reason why I like to start with this framework is because it really helps think about it in a simpler way of just like three bucketed areas and really focusing in on one area versus another at a time. So if you are in the situation where you're lacking in all three, it can be good to first identify where you're strongest, in Julie's case, process. And so think about how could you amplify process further first. Usually we encourage folks to focus on their strength before they start focusing on their weaknesses, just because that's where you already have the most momentum going for your organization. And so what that might be, in the context of process is thinking about what sort of meetings could we put in place to start scaling this process to become even more, robust in terms of what we're offering here. If we are getting one proposal out every single month, how could we potentially get to two? What are the progressive steps we'd need to take there? What you often will find when I've asked this question is that a lot of times people struggle most in process as well as in technology. People is usually where they're strongest because in many cases, nonprofits are used to getting a lot done with very few people. That's kind of the whole, nature of a lot of the industry, unfortunately. And so in many cases, people feel really strong about the people side of things, but they're less clear about the process or the technology side. But as you think about this is a sort of conversation that I want you to take beyond this workshop and take it back to your organization and think about it from this lens where it's like, hey, you can apply this framework beyond just grant seeking to just general other fundraising strategies. When you think about, your individual donor campaigns, let's talk about people, process, technology. Do we have everything in place? Are there certain things stronger than others? These are the sorts of questions you want to ask yourself, especially when you're in the month of January, the start of a year, and you have the whole year ahead of you to start improving these sorts of things for your organization. All right, so these three must-haves are really at the core of what we've built with Instrumentl. Instrumentl's customers, essentially, we hear them say we're the most robust grants database that they've ever used, really changed their grant-seeking life, the definitive database for grant research, the hammer in the toolbox that just gets the job done, and the one-stop grant research database and time saver. There's a reason why we are consistently a leader and easiest to use across the boards, just because we focus on simplicity and getting you to optimize for your process and your technology side while making sure that the people are motivated to actually use the platform. So what we're going to talk about in this next section of the presentation is how to get a personalized list of good fit funders. All right, so this next session, as I mentioned at the start of this workshop, since I noticed a couple of you guys trickled in, there is an entire hour-long class where I dig more in depth on this particular topic. But because this is a workshop where I'm covering the strategy side of different components of grant strategy, what I recommend is follow along as well as you can for now. In the end of this workshop, I'm going to give you a link where you can register for an on-demand version of this class. Feel free to take that at your own leisure for whenever it works for your schedule. But just note that this is going to be something where I'm just going to be scratching the surface that gets us to first base, but taking you to home plate is going to be homework for you guys in terms of really getting the most out of that workshop. The easiest way to do so is with Instrumentl. There are other alternatives like Google, ProPublica, funder websites, the IRS. But the advantages of doing it with an Instrumentl is that in 3 steps, in just the next 5 minutes or so, we're going to create free accounts. And from there, we're going to set up a project. And within that project, we're going to get a list of funding opportunity matches. These are going to represent active grant opportunities that we can immediately begin pursuing. So I noticed a number of you guys in the chat mentioned how you're kind of earlier on in your grant process. You're not really sure exactly what to do next and whatnot. And so as you are setting up your projects, that'll kind of give you a kickstart in terms of the process, because it's going to give you a short list of opportunities that you can really start doing some more due diligence on. So what I want you to do is go ahead and go into the Zoom chat, click the link that I'm going to share. I'm going to click it with you guys, and then we're going to go ahead and create our free accounts together. In the case where you happen to be in the audience and you already have an Instrumentl account, just go ahead and log into that account since you won't need to create that. But in the case where you are new, go ahead and click that link with me and we'll follow along here. This is where I'll be on the homepage. And what we can do is we can just create our free account. I'm going to go ahead and create a free account here. And then I'm going to go ahead and select 501c3. I'm going to do example project for Garrett workshop. Select your operating revenue. As I mentioned before, this is why I mentioned that we primarily serve 90K or greater operating revenue and 501c3 status, is because that is what you need in order to be able to use Instrumentl. Let me see. Did that work? Hold on. Something happened there. My page refreshed. One sec. All right, let's try this. Oh, why isn't this working? One second. Let me make sure that I have this link right. Ping somebody real quick. Okay, well, in the case where that link doesn't work, let's see if I can give you one to the main site, and maybe that'll work as an alternative. One second. Try this link. I'm going to try this link real quick. All right. If this works, I will then share this in the Zoom chat. We've made some changes to our sign-up form, so that might be why I'm seeing some differences here. Okay, one sec. There we go. Okay, cool. I'm going to put this into the Zoom chat. Use this link instead. All right, so when you do this, you can go ahead and sign up on that first page. And then from there, what you can do is you can go ahead and schedule time with our team if you want later on to talk more about your grant strategy and your use case. But also, if you want to skip that for now, feel free to do so. I'm going to skip because I don't want to take one of you guys' time slots, but you guys are more than welcome to select a time that works for you. When you get there, you're going to get to this first page, which is let's help you find new funders. So once you get to this page, give me a thumbs up in the Zoom chat, and then I'll pause for a second so that people can catch up. And then we'll start to run through setting up our projects together. See some folks giving me some thumbs ups. Great to see. Awesome. Wow. Everyone's so fast here. Usually it takes a minute or so. Holly, Nicola, Julie, Jackie, awesome. All right, well, as other folks are continuing on that sign up form, I know it took me a second to get that link in place for you guys. Feel free to take your time, but on this first page, this is where we're going to set up our projects together. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select where our organization is registered. In this case, I'm going to take the example of being based out of San Francisco. So I'm going to say San Francisco County, but you can choose wherever your nonprofit is based out of. And then from there, choose your fiscal year. I'm going to say that I am running on a standard January 1st to January 31st fiscal year. Click Save and Continue. From there, for your project name, you want to be as specific as you can about a particular fundraising initiative that you're working on. So let's say, for example, if you are raising for, let's see here in the chat, we've got newer to grants. Let's see, there are. Okay, so Ben is providing permanent homes for homeless veterans. So in this case, I'm going to do homeless veterans project. And then you can name it whatever you want, but you want to be as specific as possible to a particular cause. So maybe this is going to be GenOp, so general operating expenses. From here, I'm going to answer whether or not I am faith-based and then click Save. And then from there, what would happen is I would go ahead and click where my project serves. In this case, it'd be inside the United States. So in this case, I'm going to select California. I'm going to select specifically San Francisco County again. In your case, you're going to select the different communities that you might serve. So what I always recommend when it comes to selecting the areas your project serves is be as specific as possible. It's something in which it really makes it so the matching algorithm is going to be as accurate as possible for you. So go ahead and do that. And then when you get to the next section on fields of work, this is where we're going to be selecting fields of work around our topic. So in this case, I'm using this example of, looking for support around homeless populations, as well as potentially community services and things like that. So homeless veterans. So I'm going to search the keyword homeless. I'm going to see how it's under community and human services. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click browse all category, and then I'm going to go ahead and click community and human services. From here, I'm going to scroll through and start to look for other related topics. So in this case, it's talking about permanent homes. So I might do affordable housing of sorts. I might do basic human needs. I'm going to go through here and just look for 3 to 5, 2 to 5 or so fields of work that are really good fits for me. So I'm going to search for veterans. Here you can see military and veterans services. I'm going to choose that. So now I've selected 4 fields of work that are potentially good fits based off the project that I'm working on. All right, from here, I'm going to go ahead and select the minimum grant size. I'm going to say $1,000 or higher so that it's worth my time. I'm going to select what my fundraising efforts are for, which is GenOp and project programs. And then from here, I'm going to go ahead and click Save and Exit. Once you've done that, you've set up your project. And then what you're going to do is if you are part of a bigger team, you can invite other team members to your team. Otherwise, you can click All Done, and then it'll redirect you to this page, which will say, we found X grants for you. And once you get here, give me a thumbs up in the Zoom chat, and then I'll know that people have caught up here. All right, so I see some thumbs ups from Holly, Aaron, Julie. They're all tracking. Good to see. And Nicola. Awesome. So what this is this is going to be a short list of grant opportunities that are active that you can start to pursue. From here, there's an onboarding tour that you can follow through. For example, it's going to talk about how every single project in Instrumentl has a tracker and matches tab This is your matches tab. This is where you're going to see the grant recommendations based off your project's criteria. You're also going to see these active grant opportunities that are going to help you curate the different ways to save hours of time prospecting. What we find is that our customers save 3 hours a week on average every single week by simply using this matches section. From here, when you start to look for opportunities that are potentially interesting to you, what you're going to find is you're going to find funding information about these opportunities. So on the right-hand side, as I selected the Disabled Veterans National Foundation's opportunity here, you can see how there's information about the 990 report that I can look at all in the same place. And so what I'm looking to do here is I'm looking to save my very first grant that might be a good fit based off of the history of giving patterns and things like that, that might potentially be in alignment to the work that I do. So something I might look for here is I might look for the section on this graph on past grantees, look at the map, look for homeless, and then see the keyword for homeless here. And you can see how this is assisting homeless and at-risk veterans. That sounds pretty close to exactly what I believe Ben was mentioning that he works on. And so these are the sorts of things that you can find when you set up a search on Instrumentl. Is you'll find all this rich data about active grant opportunities that you can start working on. I'm going to go ahead and click save to save this to my tracker. And when I do so, I can then start to work through this checklist, which I'm not going to be able to go through entirely in this workshop, but I will be able to go over the high level of exactly what you're seeing here, which is what we created together just now in under 5 minutes. Is we created an active project of searches for your particular fundraising cause area. And you can do this over and over again based off of the different programs and initiatives you might be fundraising for. So if I had another fundraising initiative, then I could go ahead and create a new project on the left-hand side. If I wanted to just filter through some of these options, there are some very robust filters in here. For example, you can see the fields of work, you can see exact matches only and all that jazz. But essentially, this is a great way for you to work your way through a short list of grant opportunities, because these are active grant opportunities that we could be actively pursuing with our organization. So once you have a few opportunities in place, you'll start to save those into your tracker. So I'm going to go ahead and save another one into my tracker here. And then what you'll see later on is you'll see this tracker where you can essentially see the grants you've saved all in the same place. And then you'll be able to track and manage everything in the same place as well. What's interesting here is that when you click into this, you're going to see all this functionality in terms of being able to add notes, add tasks, documents, and things like that as well. Later on, when you have more time to play around with things and things like that, feel free to complete this checklist. It'll help you in getting started. And also, if you booked a time with our team member during that signup process, then you can talk a lot more about this stuff. But as I mentioned, this workshop is more about the strategy side of things. So I'm not going to spend too much more time in terms of the project here. I just wanted to set you guys up so that if you did follow along in that link and you created your account, you're now going to have another 2 weeks to just continue to check out this list of good fit funders and start working backwards on potentially some funding opportunities to pursue in this month of January. All right, so let's hop back into the presentation here. And then we're going to start talking about some of these other topics for today, including but not limited to just like things that we should consider when it comes to staying on top of grant deadlines and considering different tools as well. All right, so let's talk about how to stay on top of grant deadlines. The number one way to do so that any experienced grant professional will tell you is building a grants calendar. Grants calendars are all about tracking your current and past grant applications in one place. The purpose here is to have a home for all of the things that you're working on related to grant seeking. You're actually going to have a grant calendar as well in your Instrumentl account. What you'll do is when you are in your account here, you can go into your tracker and you can click calendar. And essentially what it'll show you is it'll show you a calendar of all the upcoming things around the grants that you've saved. So the nice thing as well of that project we just set up is that everything you need for this year's success in grants is going to be covered in this account as well as you start to organize everything in one place. All right. So when it comes to grants calendars, they're really important for 5 reasons. The first reason is because they improve time management. With a grants calendar, you won't miss out on any grant or reporting deadlines. You'll have better planning of tasks as well as avoid duplicative work. You'll also promote collaboration. This helps promote transparency across your team, delegate tasks, easily report on goals, and share information faster. You'll be able to build a library of records as well. So this is really useful because if you have a team that either sees some turnover over the years or there's new people coming into your team, then it's something in which if you have a single source of truth, then they can easily get caught up on all the past work that you've done around grants. The other thing you can say about grants calendars is that they help you elevate your strategic planning. This is something in which you'll be able to track forward progress and identify areas for improvement along with general goal setting for the future. And what this all does is by putting everything in one place, it creates capacity for work beyond just grants or fundraising. This really allows us to start working on program development, reputation building, and just those other efforts that you might not necessarily get to today because there's just too much on your plate as is. So when it comes to building a grants calendar, there's really 5 steps that you can take. The first thing that you want to do is you'll want to go ahead and determine what is important to track. It's really important you do this because you'll be able to suss out exactly what sort of data points you want in your research process. For example, past funding trends or who is writing the grant in your organization. What are the submission deadlines, the amount requested? A nice perk of the project you just set up in Instrumentl is that every single week, we not only tell you about the active grant opportunities that are coming up for you, but also we summarize all the tasks and deadlines that are also on your calendar. And so again, it's that single source of truth idea of having all your grants work in one place. This is also something in which it allows you to take stock of your existing relationships. You can use this free grant tracking template, which I will share in the Zoom chat. And it's just a simple Google template that you can use to make a copy of. And again, the nice thing here is that if you use that template, you can actually import it into Instrumentl by looking into the import section, the add new section in your tracker. I'll share with you with that a little bit later today, but you can use this tracker template in the case where you don't have anything today, just to get things a little bit more organized. And the benefit of a grants calendar as well is that you'll be able to shortlist some of the new opportunities from the matches you just got earlier about 10 minutes or so ago. The goal for you coming out of this workshop should be to try to save 3 opportunities. And the reason why you'll want to do that is because by saving 3 opportunities, you'll really have a head start in terms of a couple opportunities for you to pursue in your organization this year. The 4th step you want to do once you set these things up is start organizing your tracker. Take ownership in terms of what is a rolling deadline versus what's a fixed deadline. Add tasks in terms of who's going to do what during different parts of the process. And then lastly, review and reflect in terms of what's going on in your tracker. It's really important that you continuously check in on what's going well, what's not, what's coming up next month or next quarter. And you can do this really easily using the reports feature on Instrumentl. I can share that if we end up having some time later on. But again, feel free to cover that with your team member that you chat with about your grant strategy later on. As a deep dive, we also have a separate class. This is a completely separate class to the other class that I mentioned in terms of finding good fit funders, but this is all about grants calendaring. If you want to learn this skill set really well, we have a self-paced class on that as well. I'll include that in the slides later on that you can check out too. All right, so now that you have Instrumentl, life is a lot easier. And the reason why is because of the few things I've stated here. Now you're going to have automagical deadline reminders and updates, weekly emails with upcoming grant deadlines, including the opportunities that you've won and lost. You'll also be able to continuously be searching for grants. Because you have that project set up, we will always be looking out for new grant opportunities for you. Collaboration is also going to be a lot easier. It's going to be way easier for you to track ownership in terms of who is owning which grant and what tasks are coming up next. You can also generate customizable reports, which help you and your board of directors or your executive director stay on top of things. Let's talk about the last topic for today, which is really about how to evaluate grant tools. It's talking about the technology side of things when we go back to that PPT framework that we started this conversation around. So first, to kind of kickstart this conversation, I'd love to hear in the Zoom chat, what are 2 or 3 things that you look for when assessing grant tools? And I'd love to see what people come up with. And then I'll share the 5 factors that we'll explore in the context of this presentation here. Zoom's doing some stuff. All right. So again, we are answering the question of 2 or 3 things that you look for when it comes to assessing grant tools. And if you haven't ever assessed grant tools, you can apply this question to just generally technology, because that's the theme of what we're talking about in this context. Ease of use and pricing is coming up from Julie. Easy to use came up from Nancy as well. Amount of grant awards, that's a good one as well from Barb. Ease of use, accuracy from Rod. Awesome. Well, these are some great points. Everybody definitely gets a thumbs up for that, because that pretty much encapsulates some of the factors that we're talking about here. I think there's really 5 factors when it comes to tooling, especially around grant tools. But honestly, you can apply these factors to any tool you ever consider, just because they're pretty all-encompassing. Some of these are particular to grants, but you could apply a similar perspective. So the first thing is finding new RFPs and funders. This really speaks to the amount of grants on the database, right? If you don't have enough opportunities to pursue, then it's very hard to justify getting a grant tool. Second thing is tracking prospect research and submissions. It's really important to have this in your grant tool, because it makes it so that you can have a single source of truth and keep everybody on the same page. I noticed that a lot of folks didn't necessarily mention collaboration reporting, but I find this to be an incredibly important facet for a lot of nonprofits that are either 500K or more in operating revenue. Oftentimes, there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of reporting involved, especially with boards. And so that can be something that's really important as well. And there's intuitiveness and the likelihood of team-wide adoption. This really speaks to ease of use. The reason why that second point on likelihood of team-wide adoption is so important is because it's not uncommon for me to enter conversations where nonprofits are talking about how they implemented some sort of tool and that person really loves it, but everyone else on the team doesn't use it. And that just leads to friction across the team, because then when one person who doesn't use the tool asks for where that particular, document or data point is, the person who does use the tool gets frustrated because they're like, it's in the tool. But the thing is, if the tool isn't intuitive or easy to use, then no one's going to actually use the tool. So I think a lot of people highlighted that in the chat, which is great to see. And then I think the last point that's really important is robustness of value and pricing. Notice how I mention it as from the context of value and pricing, because ultimately, when you're evaluating any tool, it should be about what's the key outcome that it can help you achieve in terms of your overall strategy in the particular area you're looking to grow in this case, grant seeking. So what I'm going to have is I'm going to have little, chili peppers, I guess, for my personal opinion of what I think nonprofits find most valuable. This is just from my experience of working with thousands of nonprofits over the last few years. Let's dig in piece by piece into each of these components. And what I want you to think about is I want you to think about these questions in the context of grant strategy as well, because this is going to be the sort of question, these are going to be the sort of questions that you're going to want to start asking yourself as you start to tee up your year. So the first thing is finding new RFPs and funders. So the first thing you want to ask yourself when it comes to technology here is, can the tool help you find active RFPs, and does it have RFP profiles? The reason why this is really important is because a lot of times, if you are newer to grants, and I know a couple of you guys are in the room today, if you just go on Google and search for grants for whatever your cause area is, you're going to come up with a challenge that a lot of people face, which is there's a lot of inactive grants out there that are being advertised as available, when actually that funder is not going to be opening their application process until maybe later in the year. So making sure your tool actually shows you active opportunities can be super important. It's also important to note, if there is detailed information about the foundation or just in general, any funder insights or data points. Something that you'll notice when you play around with the free account that we created earlier today is that when you start to dig into those 990 reports, you're going to see some interesting statistics like that map of the United States, which helps you see all the different places where funders have been giving to, as well as things like the percentage of new grantees and repeat grantees. You also want to be able to look at things like, can you actually reverse search a grantee profile? Why is this important? If you can look up a similar nonprofit to yours in your local area and see who is funding them, that is pretty much a golden ticket to finding new grant opportunities that are in your backyard. And so that's something that you can also do on Instrumentl later on today when you're playing around with the tool. You can check out things like smart matching to RFPs and foundation profiles. But the key goal when it comes to finding new RFPs, when we really summarize all of these key questions, is can I identify good fit funders? If the answer is yes, then proceed to the next area. The next area is really tracking prospect research and submissions. So let's say you went ahead and found new RFPs and funders. What's next? Well, what's often next is tracking prospect research and submissions. So in this case, you want to answer questions like, can you save prospects and notes on opportunities? Is there a submission tracker or grants calendar? We talked about why grants calendars are so important. It's pretty much the key to a lot of people's grant success, especially when it comes to raising millions of dollars in grants. I've run this poll, and it's what's interesting is across the industry, only about 1 in 2 people actually use grants calendars. So if you already are using a grants calendar, that puts you ahead of the curve in terms of just organization of process. Also, do you get automatic deadline reminders? We talked about why that's useful, because if you have that in place, then it's something in which you'll save a lot of time and headache of having to allocate time in your calendar to double check that a grant proposal deadline hasn't changed. I can't tell you enough the number of times people are saying that they have calendar holds to check all the proposals they're working on just to make sure that nothing has changed. Do you get updates when they change their priorities or deadlines on that point? And also, can you manage the grant pipeline across all stages? Tracking prospect research and submissions is a hugely underrated section of grant seeking, especially when it comes to the strategy side of things. So definitely prioritize that, because the better organized you are in your tracking, the easier everything else is. The third component is really collaboration and reporting. So things to ask yourself when you're evaluating tools here is, can the tool support more than one user? Can you create a CSV or PDF report? How customizable are these? Can you store documents year over year? Again, that speaks to that earlier point I talked about, which is if you have turnover in your organization every now and then, it's really hard to onboard that new person without that institutional knowledge that the prior person had. And so if you use appropriate technology, it can help you speed up your ramp up time for that person. Also, can you save grant responses, right? That's really important because it can save you some time the next year when it comes to getting that proposal out the door. What about intuitiveness and likelihood of team-wide adoption? Well, we spoke to a couple of these points, but the first question to ask yourself is, can you organize your work into projects? They're really important, because if you can organize it into projects, then you really have like a structured playground for everything around that particular initiative. And it makes everything a little bit more organized for your team, because maybe you're on a 4-person team where 2 people work on one project and 2 people work on the other project, but you all want to be on the same platform. That's really important to think about in terms of just the organization and setup of your organization. Does the tool have a modern user interface? This is something where, easy to use came up a lot in the chat. And I think that really speaks to what we all want, which is something that you can learn in under a half hour. And that's something that you definitely want to ask yourself is, have I learned the ins and outs of most of this platform in like under a half hour or so? Or is it something in which I have to spend a ton of time to learn the ins and outs? If any of you guys are using Salesforce in the audience, you know what I mean. It is not an intuitive platform. It takes hours of training sometimes to just learn where a certain data point is. And so those are the sorts of things that lead to frustration and ultimately ineffective tech implementations, because people don't buy into the idea of what the vision is for that tool. And the last area is really robustness of value and pricing. So what are some things to consider here? Well, one thing to consider is, can the tool you're evaluating eliminate one or more tools you're already using? This is a great way to consolidate workflows, bring everything into one place, and essentially start to really streamline things. And so if you're, for example, using an Excel sheet right now for your grant tracking, but then you're also using like a CRM for like your reporting of grants awarded and things like that, you might want to find a grant tool that can do a little bit of all of that, right? Also, can you see your team members saving a ton of time with this tool? What we find is that our customers are saving 12 plus hours a month per team member. So that's something which it really starts compounding because you start saving pretty much entire work weeks very quickly. And so have you been able to, experience the value proposition of the product during the trial period as well? Or is it something where they even offer you a trial? Asking these sorts of questions and expecting that from your grant tool should be really important as well. When you have all 5 of these components, you ultimately have yourself a tool that meets your needs. Really important that you find something that works for you. Everyone is in a different place in their grants journey. And so there is no real ultimate answer for what's best for you, but you should look at it from this sort of framework of these 5 pillars as you're evaluating tools, just to make sure that you actually have, something that works for you. So what you can do from here is you can do your own due diligence, prioritize what your organization values, ask your team. Here's an example of how one person did it. They shared it with me in an email, but essentially they created a nice little Excel sheet where they compared Instrumentl to some other tools, and they presented this to their board. And that's how they got buy-in into the purchase of the grant tool that they chose, which was in this case, Instrumentl. Wrapping things up before we start going into Q&A, here are a few learning takeaways from today. The first thing is that a strong three-legged stool is crucial for your grant success. We talked about why people are important, why process is important, and why technology is important, and why having one being stronger than the other means that you potentially need to just focus in different areas at a time in order to appropriately adjust for, where you're trying to take your grant strategy. But either way, you noticed how all 3 of these components were interconnected with one another, and one would impact the other, and so on. The other thing we learned about is how Instrumentl can be a grant fundraising best friend. Take your time, take your time back and free yourself from the deadlines. The folks that created accounts today with that link, you're going to have access for the next 2 weeks to continue to play around with things. And if you need time with any of our team members, feel free to book a time with us. If you accidentally skipped it earlier and you want to book a time, just send us an email or send me an email and I'll make sure that you get to the right place there. And the last thing that we talked about was choosing the right technology. And when it comes to that, what I really recommend you think about as you approach this year is maximize for value when choosing your grant tool. Grant tools can be so much more than just a database. And it's something in which by raising the bar of what you're expecting of your tools, it makes it for everybody to have a better experience and also to get greater success. Instrumentl customers within their first year of using us typically raise $200K in additional grants. And that's just because of how effective the tooling can be if you cover those 5 pillars that I talked about. If you learned a lot in today's workshop, we do have a lot of other workshops around a variety of nonprofit and grant writing topics. We're actually on the calendar in a couple of weeks from now to talk about how to unlock recurring grants through your volunteer program. You can check that out and more using the link in the bottom right. I can put that in the Zoom chat later too before the Q&A section. But just check us out. There's also some free grant writing classes on our blog, over 50 hours of on-demand learning completely free. A lot of people out there try to charge hundreds of dollars for grant training, and we believe in providing a lot of high quality free educational opportunities for folks. And so hopefully you can take advantage of that if you find yourself in the earlier or intermediate stages of your grant writing journey. If you want to follow up with me, my email is will@instrumentl.com. Here are the 2 codes that I shared in the very first slide, which was to save $50 off your first month if you end up liking it, or if you want to save 2 months off your annual plan, it's Garrett2Mo annual. Lastly, I mentioned that everybody gets freebies for today. There's 3 hours of on-demand grant writing classes. Those are going to cover some of the points that I talked about earlier in the case where you want to learn how to be more robust about your grants calendar, or if you want to learn how to find new good fit funders in more depth. You can continue learning with me by submitting your feedback form. If you do it by the end of day Tuesday, then you can get access to those 3 classes as well. With that, that wraps up today's presentation. If you have any questions, I love to see them in the chat and I can tackle them. Otherwise, thanks so much for attending today. Let's open it up to questions. All right. Melon Duffy asked, how do you reach foundations and other philanthropists that don't have our open RFPs? That's a great question. And I'll show you actually a great way you can do research on that in Instrumentl. So earlier on, we set up that project and I went over the funding opportunity matches section. But there's actually a second side of Instrumentl that's completely different than that, which is funder matches. And what funder matches represent is these are funders who might not have open RFPs and might be invite only. But essentially, what we do is we parse through all the data to show you the ones that might be better fits for you to start building relationships with. So one way is check out the funder matches tab in the section of your account that you created today, because in this funder matches tab, you will find a list of potentially some people that are not open for RFPs, but you want to figure out who those people are. What I recommend as a general rule of thumb is look for giving rates to new grantees that are greater than 30%. It means that they are giving a decent amount to new grantees every year. And that's always a good sign, because that means that when they say they like to build new relationships, they actually do it through the data. But as you go through this section, what you'll be able to look at is you'll be able to see things like the giving averages and medians and see whether or not it matches with your particular fundraising area. So that's one way that you can find, foundations that don't have open RFPs, is by building a backlist here. Another way that you can do so is by doing reverse research. So I call it like Sherlock Holmes approach, but an example that I use a lot in like workshops is if I'm running an after school tutoring program, I might look up an organization that's similar to me. So if I'm looking up Tutoring Chicago based out of Chicago, then I can actually open up the recipient profile. And when I do so, what it'll do is it'll show me specifically their past awards received. So in this section, this is a recipient profile, and I can click past awards received. And this is where I can then find a list of foundations that are funding nonprofits that are very similar to nonprofits like me. And from here, I can find another list of folks that might not necessarily have open RFPs, but they might be in my local area, and I could start building relationships with them. If you're looking for actual strategy as well, or tips and tricks on how to work with invite-only funders, what you can do is I will share with you in the Zoom chat a blog post on our blog. If you search invite only funders Instrumentl blog, we have a blog post that details how to do this. So feel free to check that out in the case where you're looking for more resources here in terms of the process that you can take and mistakes to make sure that you avoid making. So hopefully that answers your question there. And if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them into the Zoom chat. Yeah, of course. And also something I should mention is our blog is rich with resources. Aside from the 50+ hours of grant writing training, if you just subscribe to our blog list, every single Tuesday, we'll share with you 4 or 5 new grant writing resources to help you when it comes to kicking things off there. So something you can check out is just we have a lot of free content out there that you can continue to learn with. All right. Any other questions for folks? And the other thing that I wanted to share too is there's a couple points I talked about in the presentation. I want to make sure that folks can find as well. In the case where you're in your Instrumentl account, you use that tracker template I shared with you. You can actually go to your tracker section and then click Add New, Upload Many. And from here, you can upload that template that you just used, because that template is actually the template that we use in our site. And when you do that, what's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and send it to our team to import into Instrumentl. And when you bring into Instrumentl, again, the benefit of this is that it brings it all into one place. You're able to update statuses and tracking. You can even put in your funder portal credentials and things like that. And so it just makes it so that it's easier in terms of getting things in place here, of just everything in one place and that concept of everything in one place. All right, let me get back to those slides. All right, it looks like there are no other questions. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for attending today. Hope you all have a great start to your 2023. And if you need to reach out to scheduling a time, talking more about your grant strategy, feel free to just shoot us an email at hello@instrumentl.com. We can definitely direct you to the right place. But yeah, hope you all have a great start to your 2023 and have a great rest of your week. Bye now.